The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I stood in the lobby of the company I built with bleeding hands. The scent of warm toner and cold betrayal hung in the air. My name was gone from the wall, replaced by my son's, and beneath his father-in-law's. I wasn't even invited to the unveiling. Just a whisper in the hallway, a ghost in my own story. And yet, they didn't know. They didn't know the corpse they buried was still breathing, and quietly, it was planning a resurrection that I wasn't always this bent old man with trembling fingers and a silent phone. There was a time my hands were strong, blackened with ink, rough from labor, always moving. I used to come home with stains on my shirt and a smile in my chest because I was building something. Not just for me, but for him. My son was my shadow once. He used to sit by the presses with wide eyes, watching the machines roar to life. He loved the smell of fresh paper, the way the rollers spun like magic. I'd lift him up to see the first prints come out, his tiny voice would say, "That's yours, Papa." And I'd smile, thinking one day it would be his. I gave my life to that company, Everline Printworks, though it didn't start with such a fancy name. Just one rented garage, an old Heidelberg press I bought with borrowed money, and no weekends. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I missed pieces of myself, bit by bit. But I was building something for my bloodline. Something they'd never have to struggle for. I didn't grow up with much. My father worked in a shoe factory until his lungs gave out. My mother cleaned houses until her fingers curled from arthritis. I swore I'd give my son more, not just comfort, but legacy. A name that meant something. When he turned 22, I handed him his first real role, operations manager. Not just because he was my son, but because he was smart. Ambitious. Eager. He worked hard in those early days. Stayed late. Asked questions. We'd sit in the break room drinking bitter coffee, making plans for the next 5 years. Back then, I thought we were two halves of the same vision. Then he met her. Don't get me wrong, I was happy for him. His wife seemed kind enough, well-spoken, from a business-savvy family. But she came from a different world. Her father was a corporate man, sleek suits, golf meetings, investment jargon. The kind of man who looked at my ink-stained hands with veiled pity. I noticed how my son started dressing more like him, talking more like him. Suddenly, our coffee meetings grew shorter. His ideas became less about loyalty and more about scaling and modernizing. He pushed for automation. Suggested we let go of old staff, dead weight, he called them. People who had worked beside me through storms and bankrupt winters. And yet, I said nothing. Because I loved him. I started staying home more, thinking maybe I was the one out of place. Maybe my time was fading like the final run of an overused plate. He took over more meetings. Clients began addressing him first. I told myself this was good. This was the dream. But late at night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering when exactly I stopped being needed. Was it the day he moved into the executive office without asking? Or the day he removed the photo of my late wife from the boardroom wall? Still, I clung to the hope that he was just finding his way. That in time, he'd remember who helped him walk. Looking back, maybe the signs were clearer than I wanted to admit. His eyes avoided mine more. His tone changed, respectful, yes, but distant. Formal. As if I were an old investor, not his father. But I said nothing. Because fathers, real fathers, don't count their sacrifices. We just keep giving, until there's nothing left to give. And even then, we wait by the phone. It was a Tuesday morning when I walked into the building and felt the temperature drop, not in the air, but in the way people looked at me. The receptionist, a girl I'd known since she was a teenager, couldn't meet my eyes. A junior manager walked past without saying, "Good morning." Something was off. The kind of off that you don't see, you feel. I reached my office door, or what used to be my office, and paused. My nameplate was gone. Just a blank space. I stood there, frozen, one hand still holding my thermos of tea. Inside, the room was cold and unfamiliar. Stripped. Bare. My bookshelves emptied. The photos of my wife, my son's baby shoes, all boxed up in the corner like I'd died and they'd cleaned house. I found him upstairs, in the boardroom. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. "Dad," he said, standing up slowly. "We were going to talk later today." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat had sealed itself shut. He motioned toward the chair across from him, already prepared, neatly placed papers on the table, a pen beside them. "I've decided to step forward as CEO," he said. "And, after discussing it with the board, we've brought in someone with more modern experience to help us navigate the next phase." My stomach sank. He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. I'd already seen it, on the internal memo accidentally forwarded to me the night before. His wife's father. The man who once told me over dinner, "Your operation's charming, like a mom-and-pop museum." That man was now CEO. And me? I was being offered a ceremonial title, Founder Emeritus. No voting rights. No decision power. Just a thank you card dressed as a noose. My son slid the papers toward me. "You'll still be compensated, of course. We just think this is best, for the company, for the future." I remember looking at him then, really looking. The boy who once fell asleep in my lap after his first shift. The teenager I taught to use the old embossing machine. The man I thought would carry my legacy with pride. And now, he was cutting me out with hands I had taught to hold a wrench. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I picked up the pen, signed each page in silence, and pushed the documents back. Before I left, I said only this. "Don't forget the smell of ink, son. That's what built this place. Not balance sheets. Not investors. Just ink and sweat." He didn't reply. Just looked away. As I stepped out of the building, carrying the box of my memories, a gust of wind caught the flap and blew a photo out onto the sidewalk, the one of him as a boy, standing in front of the old Heidelberg press, smiling with ink on his cheeks. I picked it up. Brushed the dirt off. And walked on. But I wasn't done. He thought I was finished, that age had taken my fight, that love had silenced my pride. He was wrong. If you've ever been cast aside by your own blood, I hope you'll walk this road with me. Tell me in the comments, how do you recover when the ones you love decide you're disposable? They erased me from the building, but they couldn't erase the ink in my bones. I didn't stop waking up at 5:30. I didn't stop checking the newsprint market or calling the old supplier just to catch up. And I didn't stop watching the company, even if I had to do it from a distance. At first, I told myself I was simply curious. But deep down, I was grieving. Grieving the death of a man whose name still lived on company brochures, but not in the boardroom. Then the whispers started. Old workers began reaching out. At the coffee shop. In the church parking lot. Even my old driver, Alam, knocked on my door one evening with a worried look. "They're cutting corners, sir," he said. "Replacing the premium stock with recycled pulp. Customers are noticing. Orders are late. Morale is gone." I listened quietly, nodding. I offered him tea, though my hands trembled as I poured. My company, the one I gave my life to, was dying. Not with a bang, but with decisions dressed in spreadsheets. Efficiency, they called it. Progress. But it was death on paper. They laid off Ruth, our typesetter of 30 years, 2 weeks before her retirement. Cited budget realignment. Told her she'd receive a thank you card in the mail. Ruth, who once worked double shifts when my wife was in the hospital. Who made my son birthday cards by hand? Then came the rebranding. They changed the logo, stripped it of its heritage, turned it into something sleek and soulless. The company name was shortened to a lifeless acronym. EPC. Sounded more like a gas supplier than a printing house. I saw it all from the outside. My son didn't know that 2 of the junior accountants were still loyal to me. They forwarded internal updates, one even mailed me a copy of the new strategic plan, glossy cover, bold font, empty soul. They wanted to go digital. Cut physical printing by 60%. Transform Everline Printworks into a creative content solutions firm. Whatever that meant. But the worst part? They were planning to sell. Not fully, not at first. Just a 35% equity stake to a tech investor from Dubai. A man with no knowledge of printing. No roots in our town. No respect for ink, paper, or people. I sat with that news like it was a stone in my stomach. I remembered the old days, when we used to host local school kids for printing demos. When the press room smelled like oil and effort. When you could hear laughter through the walls, not just keystrokes. That memory haunted me. I went to visit the factory one afternoon, just to walk past it. I stood across the street in the shadows of the trees, watching workers come and go. Many of them didn't recognize me. A few did. They paused, nodded respectfully, eyes lowered. One man, probably no older than 30, stopped. "Sir, we miss you," he said, voice cracking. "It's not the same. It's not right." I thanked him and walked on, faster than I meant to. I didn't want him to see the tears welling up. Was I really so replaceable? Had all those years, all those sacrifices, been just a stepping stone for someone else's ambition? I sat at my kitchen table that night, surrounded by silence. I opened an old ledger, one from the first year we made profit. I ran my fingers down the page, touching every name, every number. And then I pulled out my own notebook. I began writing again. Not stories, not journal entries. Just observations. Names. Connections. Weak points. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was preparation. It wasn't a board meeting, a contract, or even a betrayal in ink that broke me. It was a conversation with a child. My granddaughter, little Mira, just 8 years old, came over one afternoon with her mother. Her visits had grown rare since the transition, but that day, she ran through my door like it was still home. We sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into the trees, her tiny legs swinging off the chair. She munched on roasted peanuts, the kind I used to keep in my office jar. She looked up at me with wide eyes, chewing thoughtfully. "Grandpa," she said, "why did Daddy say you don't work anymore because you didn't understand the future?" My heart stilled. "He said that?" She nodded. "He said you were old-fashioned and that Grandpa Anwar is smarter with companies and money and stuff." Grandpa Anwar. That's what she called her other grandfather. The one who now sat in my chair. I forced a smile and patted her head. "That's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes people say things they don't mean." But inside, something broke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked into my study, turned on the dim lamp, and stared at the framed photo on the wall, me and my son, 10 years ago, standing in front of the Heidelberg. He had his arm around me, grinning. My wife had taken that photo. She'd said, "You two look like legacy and future." Now, I was just the past. I pulled out the crumpled company brochure I had kept from their rebranding launch. I stared at the words, "New Era." "Fresh Minds." "Forward Thinking." My photo was cropped out, but I remembered the original image. They'd used my body, just not my face. Then I saw the fine print, "Retiree health coverage phase-out begins Q4, pending financial review." They were cutting healthcare for retirees. For the people who built that company with their backs and breath. I picked up the phone. Called Ravi, our former HR director who had quietly resigned a month after I left. Is it true? I asked. He sighed on the other end. Yes. They say it's temporary. But the board signed off. Led by Anwar. And my son? A pause. He didn't object. I thanked him and hung up. My hands were trembling, not from age this time, from fury. That was the final nail. They hadn't just erased me. They were gutting the soul of the company, hollowing it out in the name of modernity, led by a man who knew nothing of sweat or sacrifice. And my son let it happen. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I went into the garage and pulled out 3 old files, folders I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents, old investor contracts, board voting rights, legacy clauses I'd quietly inserted years ago, thinking I'd never need them. Turns out, I did. The man they buried was beginning to rise. Not with noise, not with vengeance, but with clarity. It was time to stop mourning. I wasn't just his father anymore. I was the founder. And I still knew how to print my name where it belonged. The day after Myra's visit, I took my old coat out of the closet, the one with ink stains on the sleeves and a broken zipper. It still smelled of the press room, oil, paper, and years. I wore it like armor. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to plan, the way I built my company in the first place, quietly, deliberately, and with patience sharper than any blade. I began with the ledger. Tucked inside the pages of my earliest accounting books were names, not just employees, but men and women who once believed in me when banks wouldn't. People who invested not in Everline Printworks, but in me. One of them was Harish Goyal. He was in his 70s now, but still sharp as a pin. I drove 3 hours to his countryside home and found him tending to a rose garden. "You're still alive," he said with a chuckle, pouring me a cup of black tea. "They told me you'd gone soft." "They were wrong," I replied. "I need your help. Just one more time." I explained everything, the betrayal, the rebranding, the sale. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. "You remember the clause we added in 1994, he asked, tapping his forehead. "Silent recapture rights. If majority shareholder equity is transferred without unanimous legacy board consent, the founding shares can be reactivated. You tucked that in during the second refinancing round." I had forgotten. But he hadn't. He made a few calls. 2 other early investors, both edged out over the years, were eager to join. One by one, the ghosts of the company returned. We pooled our remaining shares, activated the dormant board, and began quietly purchasing debt equity. You'd be surprised how cheaply companies sell their soul when they're bleeding cash. I didn't announce anything. I didn't walk into meetings or send angry letters. I waited. Listened. Learned. Through a loyal contact in procurement, I discovered they were behind on supplier payments. Another informant in HR told me employee turnover had tripled in 6 months. Even customers were leaving, confused by the new content solutions branding that no longer promised what we once delivered: quality, reliability, care. Meanwhile, I made visits. Not many, just enough. I'd stop by the homes of old workers. Drink tea. Listen. Ask questions. Word began to spread in hushed tones: "He's not done yet." I became a ghost in their story, but one they couldn't shake. At night, I'd sit in my study with a map of the company's departments pinned to my wall. I marked areas I knew had been weakened. Departments run by yes-men. Gaps in leadership caused by cost-cutting. I remembered the way my son used to think like me: structured, careful. But now, Influenced by his father-in-law's arrogance, he had grown overconfident. Too focused on optics. Too sure no one was watching. But I was watching. And I was preparing to move. The final trigger came through an old bank partner who forwarded me a confidential alert, a notice of impending acquisition. The Dubai investor was scheduled to sign the controlling stake in 14 days. That would seal it. End everything I built. So I made my call. We scheduled a board session under the authority of the legacy shareholder agreement. My son and his father-in-law wouldn't be notified until the morning of, just as I intended. I remember looking in the mirror the night before. I didn't see an old man anymore. I saw the founder. The father. The name they tried to bury. And he was walking into that boardroom not to ask for his seat, but to take it back. The morning of the meeting, I put on a charcoal gray suit, the same one I wore the day Everline Printworks signed its first national contract. It didn't fit like it used to, my shoulders had slumped, my waist had thinned. But that suit still carried weight. Legacy doesn't wrinkle with age. I arrived early. Of course I did. I walked the hallways like a ghost returning to his old house. Workers stared. Some smiled softly. Others quickly looked away, as if unsure whether I was real. The boardroom was just as I remembered, but colder now, stripped of the warmth we once built into its bones. The photo wall had been updated, sleek, modern, clinical. My portrait was gone. But not for long. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the founder's chair, polished, heavy, familiar. The legacy board was already there, Harish, Mrs. Fernandez, old Mr. Puddock. All of them holding copies of the bylaws they once helped write. This was our house. We had simply loaned it out. My son walked in 5 minutes late. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes widened, not in surprise, but fear. Not the kind of fear that screams. The kind that freezes. "Dad," he said, with a forced smile. "I didn't know you were." "You didn't need to," I said gently. "This is a shareholders' assembly. And you, my son, are not the majority shareholder." Behind him walked his father-in-law, still smug in his tailored suit. He looked around with amused disdain. "This meeting is invalid," he said. "Legacy clause or not, the current board has control." Harish slid a thick folder across the table. "Not anymore. We've reacquired controlling interest. Quietly. Legally." Mr. Puddock leaned forward. "And under Clause 12C, the founder has veto power on any equity sale that dilutes the original mission of Everline Printworks." My son looked at the folder, then at me. "You've been planning this." "No," I said. "I've been watching. There's a difference." I pulled out a second folder, filled with documented employee testimonies, supplier complaints, and internal memos. It landed on the table with a heavy thud. "This," I said, "is what you've turned my company into. A shell. A brand without blood." His father-in-law scoffed. "It's business. You're sentimental. That's your flaw." I met his gaze. "No, sir. That's my strength. Sentiment built loyalty. Loyalty built this company. What have you built besides debt and ego?" I stood up slowly, placing my hands on the table. "I hereby revoke all executive powers granted under the Interim Modernization Charter. Effective immediately, you are both relieved of duty. The board concurs." Silence. My son's lips parted, but no words came. For once, he couldn't spin it. Couldn't reason it away. I looked at him, really looked. Not with anger. Not even with disappointment. Just truth. "You replaced me, son. Not with a better man, but with a mirror of what you thought success looked like. But real legacy, it's built in silence. In sacrifice. And now, I'm taking it back, not for revenge, but to protect what we once started. He nodded faintly. There was nothing left to say. As he and his father-in-law gathered their things and left, the room stayed still. Heavy. But something shifted. It was mine again. Not just the chair. The name. The dignity. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was cleansing. The kind that comes after a storm. Tell me in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Would you have fought, or walked away with your pride? I want to hear from those who faced silent betrayal. The boardroom emptied slowly, but I stayed seated long after the door closed. My hands rested flat on the table, the same table where I once taught my son to sign his first contract. Now, they were steady again. No tremor. No doubt. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Taking back the company hadn't brought me joy. Just clarity, like stepping into a house after a fire, finding some walls still standing, but knowing nothing would ever be the same. The next few days moved quickly. Word spread across the staff like wildfire. Some cheered quietly behind closed doors. Some were cautious, waiting to see if the change would stick. After all, I had been a ghost. Now I was flesh again. I didn't storm into departments. I walked slowly, one step at a time. The press floor was quieter now, fewer workers, less motion. But the machines still held memory in their gears. I placed my hand on the Heidelberg, the old girl still humming in the corner. She shuddered slightly, like she recognized my touch. I called back Ruth. I reinstated employee benefits. And I sat with the HR team to review every unjust firing and every unpaid hour left behind by the previous leadership. Not to shame them, but to make it right. On my third day back, I visited the design office, where the new branding team sat. I asked for a copy of the new logo. They handed it to me nervously, sleek silver lines, emotionless, like a luxury car badge. I asked, "What does this mean to you?" One young designer, barely in her 20s, looked me in the eye and said, honestly, "Nothing. We were told to make it look expensive. Not meaningful." I nodded. "Thank you for your honesty. Let's try something else." We went back to the drawing board. I pulled out an old emblem, a forgotten mark we'd used in our earliest days. It was my wife's initials, subtly woven into a paper scroll. She had designed it herself, back when we had nothing but a dream and a borrowed printer. That emblem came back. Quietly. Like me. The day the new logo was unveiled, I stood in front of the staff and said just a few words. This company is not built on impressions. It's built on ink, paper, and people. That's how it will live again. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. A few teared up. One man whispered, "Welcome home, sir." But the real turning point came the following week. My son showed up. Unannounced. Alone. He looked different, tired, thinner. No suit. No father-in-law. We sat in my office, the door closed, the air thick with everything unspoken. He spoke first. "I didn't expect you to come back like that. I didn't expect you to leave me out like that," I replied. He winced. Looked down. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he whispered. "Modernizing. Moving forward." I said nothing. Just watched him wrestle with the weight of his own choices. "I wasn't trying to replace you," he said. But I was, ashamed to admit I didn't know how to lead. So I leaned on someone who sounded confident. "He promised everything. And you didn't ask what it would cost," I said. He nodded slowly. There was no apology. Not really. But there was something softer in his voice. Something cracked. Truth. I stood and walked to the window, watching the workers below start the day. The sky was gray, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. I didn't come back to hurt you, I said. I came back to protect what mattered. He stood too. Hands in pockets. Voice low. I see that now. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But as he left, he paused at the door. Maybe one day. I'll learn to do it right. I didn't answer. Not yet. But for the first time, I believed it might be possible. It was a crisp Thursday morning when I walked through the factory gates not as a visitor, but as the man in charge. Not on paper. Not in whispers. In truth. The sky was pale blue, and the breeze carried the scent of warm ink from the first morning run. That smell, so familiar, reached into my chest and pulled something loose. Not pain. Not pride. Just belonging. They had tried to bury me, dress me in legacy like a tombstone. But legacy, when built with hands and heart, doesn't die. It waits. It remembers. I paused in the hallway by the main office. Someone had placed a small, framed photo on the wall. It was me, in my younger days, adjusting the ink rollers, sweat on my brow and my son beside me holding a wrench too big for his hands. No plaque. No caption. Just the truth. When I stepped into the daily operations meeting, heads turned. Some of the newer staff had only heard stories. Now they were seeing the man behind the initials. I didn't deliver a speech. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, let's get back to work, the right way. The next weeks passed like rain after a drought. Systems were reviewed. Old standards reinstated. The balance sheet didn't turn green overnight, but something better happened. The workers smiled again. We reinstated the annual bonus for press operators. Ruth came back, part-time, by choice, and trained 3 new apprentices who had never worked with a real typesetter before. And perhaps most meaningful of all, the healthcare policy was restored. Retroactively. The first check I signed under my reinstated authority wasn't for profit. It was for a man named Pranav, a retired technician whose lung medication had been cut when the benefits were slashed. I drove it to his house myself. He answered the door in surprise, oxygen tube still clipped to his nose. He didn't say thank you. He said, "You came back." And that was enough. As for my son and his father-in-law, the company board officially removed both from all future decision-making processes. Anwar, slick, polished, overconfident, tried to threaten legal action. But he had nothing. No equity left. No contract unbreakable. Just silence. And my son? He disappeared for a while. Not in shame, I think, but in reflection. He's still my son. I didn't burn the bridge. I just made sure he understood where it led. We haven't spoken since that day in my office. But Mira sent me a drawing last week, me and her holding hands in front of a printing press. She spelled my name, Grandpa, with ink. That drawing now hangs above my desk. No consultant, no strategist, no father-in-law in the world could ever build that kind of branding. I'm not blind. I know age is a clock that only ticks forward. I don't intend to run this company forever. But when I do leave, it will be on my own terms. With dignity intact. Not as a ghost shuffled out the back door, but as a man who stood, fought, and stayed until the ink dried right. And when I'm gone, the smell of toner and paper will still linger in these halls. Because I built it. Because I came back. Subscribe if you believe that dignity matters more than dollars. And tell me, have you ever had to fight for your name? For your place in something you helped build? I want to hear your story. Every morning now, I rise before the sun. Old habits, I suppose. My body still follows the rhythm of pressroom shifts, even though the machines hum without me these days. I put on water for tea. Not in a fancy kettle. Just the old steel one with a bent spout and a blackened bottom. My wife bought it when we moved into this house, long before success found us. It still whistles the same way. Sharp, steady, stubborn. I pour into the chipped mug with the faded company logo, the original one. The one with her initials. And I sit by the window. From this seat on the porch, I can see the very tip of the Everline warehouse roof. When the light hits it just right, it gleams like a silver promise. The workers begin arriving by 7 o'clock. I watch them come, lunch tins in hand, heads held higher than they were 6 months ago. I don't go in much anymore. I don't need to. I've trained the next generation, not just my replacement, but caretakers. People who know this company isn't just a machine. It's a memory. A vow. A living thing. That was all I ever wanted, not riches, not applause, not titles. Just to be remembered rightly. People still ask me why I didn't just walk away. Why not retire quietly? Let them ruin it, and let it go? I never have the perfect answer. Only this. Because when something bears your name, when it holds your sweat, your family, your years, you don't let it rot while you still have breath. You don't abandon a house just because someone changed the locks. You find the spare key. And you walk back in. My son hasn't returned since that last conversation. But he sent a letter. No apology. Just a few words. I understand now. I wasn't ready. But I want to be. One day, maybe. I sat with those words a long time. Didn't write back. But I kept the letter. And every evening, I leave the porch light on. In case he ever decides to come home. Mira visits often now. We draw together. Last week she asked, "Did you really own a factory?" I said, "No. I just looked after it for a while." She nodded like that made perfect sense. And maybe, to her, it does. I've stopped needing credit. I've stopped chasing closure. I have peace. Not the kind that comes from revenge or victory, but the quiet kind that follows truth. The kind that seeps into your bones like warm light after winter. The company stands. My name is no longer in bold letters on the building, but it's etched into every corner of that place. In the creak of the office chairs. In the faded tape on old supply boxes. In the laughter of workers who remember what it used to be. And what it is again. The last light in my window doesn't shine for recognition. It shines so those who are lost can find their way back. If not today, then someday. And if no one comes, well, I'll still be here. Mug in hand. Eyes on the press. Heart full. Because I remember who I am. And no one can take that from me again.